We are in the front side of a series. We're looking at the first couple chapters of 1 Corinthians. The verse that we kind of as our springboard says in 1 Corinthians 1:17, Christ did not send me to baptize, Paul writes, but to preach the gospel, not with words of human wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. And the thing that surprises us as we look at that verse, the cross of Christ can be emptied of its power. I think Andre Crouch a long time ago saying the blood can never lose its power. Perhaps it's true, but the cross can, apparently. It can be rendered impotent and powerless. So it's possible to kill the cross. Before we can understand what a powerless cross is, let's remind ourselves what a powerful cross is. Last week we talked about what the cross does when it's operating at full power. If you have a worship folder, there's a sheet in there, and let's look what it says. Remind ourselves in Colossians. What does a powerful cross do? When the cross is operating at full power, what happens? Paul writes, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. It says that he reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death. What happened at the cross? God reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death. So the question becomes, what does reconcile mean? Reconcile means to change or exchange. To change or exchange one thing for another. If you look at the bottom of your worship folder on the sheet, there's a definition as it applies to relationships. To reconcile is to end a relationship of enmity, hostility, and to substitute for it one of peace and goodwill. That's what reconcile means. It's a description of what happens at the cross. It's a concept of reconciliation that's rarely, if ever, applied in a religious setting, and the reason for that is curious. It was never talked about as reconciling God because to a Jew or a Greek, the idea of a personal relationship with God wasn't even on the radar. So you would never apply a personal image to an impersonal relationship. That's what a relationship with God was like. But here Paul then takes this, and he is the sole New Testament writer to use this term and to apply it for the cross. Reconciliation adds a clarity that other terms he had, those other terms weren't able to provide. Salvation, forgiveness, redemption. All those terms say some good things about the cross, but when Paul is trying to find a term, he lifted this term from secular culture, looked at it, and said, this is the one. What happened at the cross? Reconciliation. Reconciliation. Ending a relationship of hostility and enmity and replacing it with one of goodwill. Paul repurposes reconciliation to give greater clarity to the impact of the cross. So here's a question. You might get this sometime. What did God accomplish on the cross? How do you explain that? What did God accomplish at the cross? You have, I think, maybe the clearest answer that the Bible provides, along with other things. What did God accomplish at the cross? Reconciliation. Reconciliation. We don't have to brush religious dust off of reconciliation. It's pretty clean, and therefore it's pretty clear. Reconciliation, a couple things we learn about it. It's something God does. That's really important. The subject of reconciliation, biblically, is God. God is the one who does the work. He's the one that does the activity. God puts an end to the enmity and replaces it with goodwill. Religion prior to this time was flipped. So if you wanted to connect with God, you had to do the work. You had to give something, kill something, give something up, do something. And if you did enough stuff, and if it was sincere enough, then God will look at it and say, well, okay then. You can come close. And reconciliation turns that on its head. It's not us initiating to get God to respond. Who's the subject of reconciliation? God is the one who initiates, and we are the ones who respond. Reconciliation is God's activity, so what do we have to do? Interestingly, that's why reconciliation is a really good term. We have to accept it, but by accepting it, we don't create it. We don't create the reconciliation. It just becomes real to us. Let's say you and I have a problem, and we've had a hostile relationship for a while, and I determine, you know what, nuts to this. I'm gonna swallow my pride or whatever's standing in the way, and I'm gonna move towards you, and we're gonna reconcile. So let's say if I come to you and I say, you know what, I'm really ready for us to be on an even keel here. I can extend reconciliation. Now, who did the work? Who came to who? I came to you. If you accept it, are we reconciled? Yeah. If you don't, are we reconciled? No. See, I can do the work, but reconciliation doesn't work until we accept it. And that's why in the Bible, what is our part? Our part is to believe. That's what it says. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. Our belief doesn't create the reconciliation. That already exists because God did the work. Our belief makes it real. And our continued belief continues to make it real. That's why when the Bible talks about belief, it's not just talking about a one-time acceptance. Now, it does involve that. But a one-time acceptance without an ongoing belief, does that do anything? With reconciliation, it's important to continue to believe it. Because what it indicates, the problem with us and God exists in our minds. Look what it says. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. We have a barrier between us and God because we know the things we've done. And when we think about God, we think of those things and we sense, we tend to withdraw, not feel as close. The cross is a visible sign of reconciliation. You know what this means? In full awareness of what we've done, God comes to you and says, you know what? I have done all the work to replace a relationship of hostility with one of peace and goodwill. Now, you know what your job is? To believe it. Can you believe it? That's what the cross means. It's a sign of reconciliation. Visible. It happened. We must believe it in order for it to be real. A powerful cross reconciles. What happened to the cross? Now you have a word for it. Reconciliation, a good word. The subject is God. The recipient, us. And we receive it by believing it. A powerful cross reconciles, a powerless cross divides, schisms and divisions, evidence a powerless cross. This is what we find in the churches of Corinth and Crete. Look what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 through 17. Again, Paul writes this letter to Corinth. Corinth is a really interesting place. I'll tell you about it. Paul writes, my brothers, some from Chloe's household. Chloe must have been the site of a house church, probably a house church leader. In those days, churches existed in homes. There weren't buildings. They met in living rooms and in courtyards. And so Chloe's house had a church, and other people's house had a church too. It says, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. What I mean is this. One of you says, I follow Paul. Another, I follow Apollos. Another, I follow Cephas. Another name for Peter. Still another, I follow Christ. And Paul writes, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized into the name of Paul? I'm thankful that I did not baptize any of you except Crispus and Gaius, so that no one can say, you were baptized into my name. Yes, I also baptized the household of Stephanas, but beyond that, I don't remember if I baptized anyone else. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with words of wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. Corinth was a place of sensual excess. In fact, you know what? To Corinthianize was a euphemism for having sex. You know, to go to Corinth to Corinthianize, everybody knew what you were saying in those days. Apparently, they were proud of their freewheeling lifestyle. One of the church members apparently slept with his stepmother. She might have been a priestess prostitute in one of the shrines, and the Corinthians thought that was kind of cool. Communion, not a pretty situation. Communion was a meal in those days. And so what they would do is find out who was bringing the pasta dish and who was bringing this, and those who knew the people a little bit better got there just a little bit early to get the good pickings off of the meal and to get the best of the wine. So by the time others came who didn't know this family as well, you know, they were picking stuff out of their teeth, those who had started out early, and they were already loaded. And they said, okay, let's celebrate the Lord's Supper. And that's the way that looked. Spiritual gifts were being used selfishly. And that was the problem with communion in Corinth. It really wasn't thinking about God at all. It was a very selfish place. And interestingly, with all these things, Paul doesn't target immoral issues as he opens the letter, and he really could have. There's plenty of them there. He has another issue that is more troubling to him. Chloe, one of the people from the house church, informed him that there are quarrels and cliques. These involved different house church allegiances. It seems to be, now we'll talk about Crete, where Titus was, and we'll talk about why there were divisions in Crete. There were divisions in Crete because of doctrine. There were divisions in Corinth, not because of doctrine, but because of kind of like, it was cliquey. There was, related to being baptized, bragging rights. Bragging rights, depending on who they were most connected to. I was connected with Paul. Who were you connected with, Apollos? You know, that doesn't even count. Cephas, and then some would trump everyone. Well, I belong to Christ. And, you know, they win that argument, I guess. But anyways, but that's what the sense was here. There was like a pecking order going on. Paul sees the divisions as evidence of a power outage. A power outage. We could see him throwing penalty flags at immorality. However, targeting divisions in our day, I think what I say when I see this, what's the big deal? We got more churches than we can shake a stick at. Every church is a little bit different. It seems that we are desensitized because of the degree of division that has occurred over the past millennia. Divisions have become epidemic, and I don't think we're going to fix this now. But what I just want us to see at this time, what Paul is really horrified by, is something that we are so used to. And again, I'm not pointing a big bony finger. I don't think we can turn the clock back. Divisions are so common to us, it doesn't even raise a reaction. For Paul, he's going to put the immorality on hold and deal first with the subject of divisions. That's interesting, isn't it? Interesting. What do you do when there's a power outage? Come on, some of you are, you know, you have the space heater plugged into the outlet, and then you have the microwave plugged into the outlet, and somebody forgets, and they turn the microwave on and the space heater, and then this, and then, and the power goes out. What do? You have to trudge downstairs. You have to get your flashlight, shine it into the fuse box. How many of us remember the time when, again, I'm dating myself now, you couldn't just flip the little switch? Some of us remember that. Oh, there you go. Some of us have to remember the thing. You actually had to, get this, remove something. You had to unscrew the fuse And you had to look to see if it was broken. Then you had to screw the fuse back in. Now we have to go through all the trouble of flipping that thing to the right and then flipping it back to the left. And sometimes, you do that. Is it on yet? And then you get, and then, what? And so if you're me, then you say what 3 or 4 times. What? And it's not on. And so then what do? Come on. Then you go outside. And you look around and it's daytime and you can't see if anybody has their lights on or not. So what you do is this. You hop in the car because there are traffic lights down the street. Now this is what some people do. There might be easier things to do, but some people I've actually heard jump in a car, go down the street, it's flashing. Okay, it's a regional power outage. That's what some people have been known to do. Power outage in our day, relative to divisions, it's not just about individual houses. This is regional. It's nationwide. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's planet-wide. How do we restore power when something has been in bad shape for a long time? Marcia and her mother raised in West Liberty. There was a West Liberty Index. There was I think it came out last year. There was a power outage in West Liberty. And what they found out is that a squirrel got into the transformer. Nice thing about small-town newspapers, they showed a picture of that squirrel. It wasn't in great shape, but it shut down things for the whole town, and that's what you do. You have to find where is the power outage from, and for West Liberty, it was the squirrel who kind of was doing one of these things, Paul isolates the problem relative to the cross of Christ being emptied of power, and he puts his finger on the cause when he says, preaching the gospel, and apparently human wisdom is the squirrel. Human wisdom got into the message. Because human wisdom got into the message, it killed the cross. The cross is as powerful as the message of the cross is accurate. Adding human wisdom to the message of the gospel is like throwing a squirrel into the transformer in West Liberty. It's going to create a power outage. And how do you restore power? How do you restore power? Wisdom in the Bible, there are a couple different kinds. One is divine and one is human. Look what it says in James 3. And it talks about the difference between human wisdom and divine wisdom. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done, and the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is, first of all, pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Human wisdom builds walls. So it seems to indicate human wisdom versus divine wisdom. Human wisdom builds walls, and divine wisdom builds bridges. Human wisdom builds walls and divides. Divine wisdom builds bridges and unites. It talks about some characteristics of divine wisdom. It's peace-loving. The opposite of being combative and pugilistic. It's being not contentious, argumentative. So divine wisdom is peace-loving. It doesn't fight, not combative. It talks about being considerate. To be considerate means to look for common ground, to find areas of agreement. Divine wisdom finds places where you can associate with someone rather than find points of division that separate you. We're getting an image here, aren't we? Divine wisdom fuses, creates fusion. Earthly wisdom, fission. Divine wisdom, fusion. Earthly wisdom, fission, separation. Submissive isn't really a good translation. It uses it. It's more open-minded, easily persuaded, well persuaded. That's what it means. Submissive, I don't know how they get that. It can mean that, but in the context, it means somebody who's able to listen, able to find common ground, is able to be influenced, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial. Impartial means literally not judgmental. Not judgmental. Sincere means non-hypocritical. Again, the thing that unites both of those things is judgment. Hypocrisy is judgment turned internally. And we'll learn about that a little bit later. Judgment turned internal. It's when we judge ourselves. And that's hypocrisy. What's judgment? This is judgment turned outside. If we deal with judgment turned inside or judgment turned outside, the reason why both of these occur is because of judgment from above. Why do we? Because we assume that we're getting judged from above. We forget what happened at the cross. We forget the cross reconciled us and turned a relationship of hostility to one of peace and goodwill. We forget that, and we assume that God is counting. And because we feel that God is counting, we turn our judgment internally, or we turn judgment externally. Human wisdom builds walls. Human wisdom also rises above. It rises above. You can tell what wisdom is, where the wisdom comes from, when you look at a person. Okay. Wisdom is directional. And this is what I mean. If I am being influenced by wisdom from below, what would you imagine that I would do? Wisdom from below, am I going to squat down or am I going to rise up? If it's from below and it's influencing me, I'm going to rise up. How can you tell wisdom from below? When people have pecking orders and they want to be chicken number one. I want to rise above. I want to find a basis upon which I can feel better than you. Wisdom from below is comparison-based. So what I'll do if it's wisdom from below, I'll look at you and I'll say, well, I might not be all that, but we compare ourselves because it makes us feel better. Wisdom from below. Wisdom from above, what would you imagine? It exerts a downward force. It leads me to stoop and to serve. To serve rather than to. So you can tell where the wisdom is from by a person's posture. Somebody who has to be putting themselves above is being influenced by wisdom from below. And again, all of us deal with this. But it's understanding. And somebody who is able to serve is being directed by wisdom from above. Pride versus humility. Pride literally means up. That's what pride is about. It's high, up high. On the other way, humility, the word for humility, tapenos, means low. And again, wisdom from above produces humility, which is low. Wisdom from below produces pride, which is above. That's the way that kind of works. Division is the sign of human wisdom. In Corinth, the divisions rose from status seeking. Where is this coming from? Who baptized you anyways? Who was it again? It was Apollos. I was baptized by Paul. What am I doing now? What do I feel about myself? I feel superior to you. Where's the wisdom coming from? Below or above? Above. No, it isn't. It's below. You were wrong. Okay. I was wrong. I'm Apollos, some of a Peter. Evidence is the desire to make their way to higher ground. It's the stubborn desire to ascend into greatness. In the Bible, you don't ascend into greatness, you descend into greatness. In the Bible, you descend into greatness. What did Jesus say? The greatest among you shall be those who serve. That's what Jesus showed the night before he died. Took off his tunic, wrapped it around himself, and what did he do? He washed their feet. Peter said, no way you're going to wash my feet. Jesus said, if you don't wash my feet, if you don't let me wash your feet, you have nothing to do. And you know what Jesus was telling them? He was showing them what greatness was like in the kingdom of heaven. The great in the kingdom of heaven serve. Human wisdom rises up. Human wisdom also tears down. In Corinth, the division came from lifting up leaders. In Crete, where Titus was, and the book of Titus, it's a short book in the Bible. Titus was dispatched to Crete by Paul to do some work there on his behalf. And in Crete, the problem wasn't people lifting leaders up. The problem was people tearing leaders down. Look what it says, Titus 3. Paul writes, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good, to slander no one, to be peaceable and considerate, and to show true humility toward all men. Avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn him a second time. After that, have nothing to do with him. You may be sure that such a man is warped and sinful. He's self-condemned. Remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities. Paul's concerned when he writes to Titus about putting leadership in place. That's what he did. He visited places, he sent emissaries to places, and what he needed to do is have people in place there who were able to be the authorized representatives of what the true message was. What he says in the beginning of the letter to Titus, the reason I left you in Crete was that you might straighten out what was left unfinished. And then he goes on to say what was unfinished, and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. And back in those days, leadership is always important, but back in those days it was even more important. Again, there weren't a bunch of Bibles around. It was the Old Testament, and therefore people learning to look at the Old Testament through Christ-colored glasses, there weren't a lot of people who could pull that off. Paul made sure that there were people in every town who were able to do that, so that there was an authoritative place for you to get your questions answered. There weren't a lot of books around on it at that point. There weren't a lot of people that understood. Again, if the first 39 books of the Bible were the only Bible we had, it would be confusing to be able to look into the first 39 books without the last 27 and to be able to God is gentle? Really? How come he's smiting so many people? What do you mean that Jesus represents God? Is that God? And Paul had to train and cause individuals to think, and he put them in charge in the churches. And that's the way it worked. That's about as much as we know about his governance structure, is find out who is wise and is in a position to be able to give leadership and put them in charge and let them give direction. Goes on to say, be obedient. Literally, it's a word that is associated. It's not just be obedient, but be persuaded by leaders. That's what the word is. It's the word for leadership and persuaded. Follow them. Do what they say. To slander no one. And this is the negative that he points out. To slander. Today, slander means to make false and damaging statements about someone. What's slander? It's kind of today when you make false statements about somebody. In the Bible, the definition is different. To slander simply means to speak against someone, to speak evil of someone. It doesn't just target false statements. Slander is not just saying something false about someone, but it could be saying something true about someone that impugns a person's character. That's slander, biblically. It's speaking against somebody. It's the same word. We've got the word is blasphemy. Blas has the sense of evil. Phema is a word. It's speaking against. Blasphemy is speaking against God, but it can apply to people, speaking against people. Interestingly, if we speak ill of another, it's possible to think that we're guarding the cross when we speak ill of another person because we're pointing something out. But what Paul seems to indicate, speaking ill of another person doesn't guard the cross. It becomes the basis of division. It guts the cross. It guts the cross. We justify running others down, but in so doing, we empty the cross of power. I know some of us are thinking, I know who needs to hear this. And if you're thinking, I know who needs to hear this, you're probably the one who needs to hear it. We have a tendency to justify and see something as okay when it comes from us, when it seems, Paul's very explicit about things that divide. There are 3 gates you should go through when you're wondering if you should pass something on or not. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Should I pass something on? I heard something about this person. 3 gates. Is it true? Is the thing that I'm going to say true? 2, is it necessary for me to say it? Do I have anything to do with this? 3rd, is it kind? What are the 3 gates? Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And if it is not one of the 3, hold it. Hold it. Slander becomes the basis of divisions. The cross being emptied of power by division, again, in Crete, the problem was doctrinal. Look what it says. Avoid, in Titus 3:9, avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless. Avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, quarrels. If somebody is majoring on the minors, watch out. Watch out if somebody's majoring on minors. Major on the majors. What is the cross about? The place where God reconciles us to himself. Somebody who uses a legitimate Christian truth to divide in the Bible is called a heretic. A heretic in the Bible is not a person who says what's false. This is important. This is, in fact, the way it defines and translates heretic here, because the word, the Greek word, irisis, that's translated divisive. In the Bible, a heretic is somebody who takes what might be a legitimate Christian truth, but a very minor one, and uses it to divide congregations. That's a heretic. Not somebody who's saying something false, somebody who's saying something that isn't really important, but this is really important. You need, again, I'm going to use a thing here, but I don't mean to be offensive or be disrespectful. Let me apply it. If you're using any version other than the King James Version of the Bible, oh, God help you. God help you. Okay. Can we have a disagreement about versions of the Bible? We don't always do the same version, do we? I might have this version, you have that version. Is it okay for us to be unique and distinct in what we do? Yes, it is. If I, though, come in and say, and there have been people who've done this, and say, oh boy, God help you, the King James is the only version. If you've got somebody spinning that, you know what I would suggest you do? Again, don't blow them up, but keep your distance. What Paul says, avoid controversies. Don't get pulled into that thing. Don't get pulled in. A divisive person is a heretic. A person who splits the church and breaks it up into parties is dividing Christ. And the body is the church. This is who Paul is most concerned about. There's a very interesting phrase here. You may be sure that such a man is warped and sinful. He is self-condemned. Self-condemned. This is an interesting word. A person who's self-condemned is a person who is judging themselves harshly. Now listen, this is, if you've got a psychological mind, I like this kind of stuff. Some of you don't. Bear with me. Somebody who doesn't like psychology, can I tell you how bad these people are? See, what would I be called in that sense? A heretic. Okay, like psychology or not. But what it's about, though, the person who sows division on the outside, if you open them up and look inside, you know what you're going to find? Division. Somebody who's inwardly divided has to sow seeds of outward division, because if I am inwardly divided and at war with myself, what's one way for me to drown that out? Create conflict on the outside. As long as I create stuff out here, I can drown out the stuff in here. That's what Paul says. Somebody who's sowing seeds of division, you can be sure that such a person is sinful and warped. They're self-condemned. The reconciliation applies not only, listen, to the relationships between us, but to the relationships within us. Some of us internally, there's a riot going on. Throwing penalty flags. I shouldn't be thinking this. I shouldn't be thinking that. God hates this. God hates that. Really? Really? Is that what God would have you be aware of because of the cross? How much God hates what you think? How much God hates what you believe? Is that what the cross is encouraging us to believe? Is it? No. And you know what's going to happen? To the degree we believe that God is all about, you know what that's going to do? That's going to set you against yourself. You won't apply the reconciliation to yourself. It'll be a horror show inside. And when it's a horror show inside, what else happens? How easy is it to love if you hate yourself? Reconciliation applies to your relationship with yourself. Maybe you need to give yourself a break. There's a thing about dialogue. Dialogue, I'll close with this. Dialogue literally means through words. Dia means through. Logos means words. Dialogue is how we break down walls between ourselves. We've talked about, there was a series in this, we talked about the three elements that are necessary for there to be dialogue between people. Again, you can do debate. Debate is us trying to figure out who's going to win and who's going to lose. That's communication. There's debate, then there's discussion. We bat ideas back and forth. There's decision making where we decide the best course of action. And again, these are all really important. Dialogue is unique in that with dialogue, you need to suspend judgment. There's 3 E's. Equality. For there to be dialogue, we need to be on the same level. I can't be doing this and making you feel smaller. We have to be equal. Equality. Empathy. For there to be dialogue, the purpose has to be not to win an argument or to decide or to even discuss. Empathy. The purpose of dialogue, the goal is, I want to understand you. I want to understand. Would you say that again? I don't think I really understand. I'm so different. Would you say that again? Why? I really want to understand. Equality, empathy, exploration. You really believe that way? Let me tell you how I believe. And you know what happens? As equals, try to empathize with one another and explore. By the way, the one thing that has to be missing in order for exploration to happen is judgment. If judgment exists, dialogue cannot occur. Can't occur. You're not safe enough to share what's deep if you have a sense that somebody is just waiting to throw a penalty flag. You ever have those discussions? Oh, I really want to talk. And if you don't dot an I across a T, boom! That's not dialogue. It doesn't happen that way. Equality, empathy, exploration. That applies externally. It applies internally. Why don't you try to be gentler with yourself? God is. You're saying, Mike, isn't that dangerous? It all depends what your perception of the cross is. You know what the cross is supposed to do? What's the word? Joel, come on up. What's the word? Reconcile. To turn a relationship of enmity to one of peace and goodwill. That includes your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others, but those are really connected, aren't they? What happened at the cross? Reconciliation. We pray. God, we live on the far end of so many years. It's hard for us to even know what's possible when we see Paul being so kind of impacted by divisions, and it's not like we're going to be able to undo. So I guess, would you allow us to do those things that would enable us to move in the direction you'd like us to move in? I pray that we would understand reconciliation, what it means between you and us. And as we apply that, believe it, hang on to it. That really is what your cross is about. And the work that it does when reconciliation happens both impacts the way we relate to ourselves and the way we relate to others. And all of us, none of us, we have things to learn. But thanks for the cross and its impact. Would you help us to be the men and women you'd have us to be? Thank you that you will take us from where we are. You're not pointing fingers. You want us to hear and believe. And I pray that we would, so that we could be the men and women you want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.